amidst the fireworks and confusion that's taking place around the city of Washington, D.C. in the first week of the Trump administration. A lot of confusion about health care. Our next guest has explored that as well as other implications of the Trump presidency in great detail. He's been on the show before. He joins us now in person. Ryan Cooper is national correspondent for The Week, which can be found at theweek.com. And he has written a piece recently, an excellent piece called This Is How American Healthcare Kills People. Ryan, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.
You bet. So first of all, what gave you the idea to write this piece, which I think you wrote about a month ago or 3 weeks ago, on how American healthcare kills people?
Well, I actually was approached by the person who was just a kind of friend on Twitter, basically. And he got very ill in the later part of last year. And he was just sort of thought it might make an interesting article and wanted to, use his own case to kind of illustrate some of the holes in the healthcare system as it exists.
As it exists at this moment. And obviously we're in a moment of transition. And I think it's important, we'll talk about this story in a second, but I think, sometimes from these little snapshots they kind of radiate out into the global issues that we're all debating now. So sometimes it's good to start with specifics. Matthew Stewart, that's your Twitter friend?
That's right, yeah.
And what's his story?
Well, he is a young man who has autoimmune hepatitis. So basically his liver's going. And one thing that happens when you get advanced liver disease is esophageal varices, which can rupture and you can bleed to death. That's what kills a lot of alcoholics. And he had an episode of that, ended up in the emergency room in an out-of-network hospital, just by virtue of where he happened to be and what beds were available. And he was nearly dead when he finally made it to the ER, so they couldn't shop around, like you might in conservative utopia. And he had the operation, and they fixed him up, and he was in intensive care for a couple days, and they transferred him to another hospital, but he ended up accumulating bills of over $60,000, which he's a grad student and getting like a $10,000 stipend. His wife's a public school teacher. They couldn't possibly pay them. And, they looked into the regulations, and it turns out that, even under the Affordable Care Act, there are certain loopholes. And just to interrupt for a second, Ryan, this is somebody who had health insurance. Yes, that's correct. Yes, he had a gold plan from the Obamacare exchanges, the second best plan you can get. But if you end up in an out-of-network hospital, you are still liable for those bills. You can be what's called balance billed, which is to say that you have to pay the difference between what the insurance pays and what the sticker price is. And that ended up, just in one day, he accumulated like $45,000 worth of bills.
That was probably his surgery.
Yes,
day.
exactly. Yeah, he had a whole bunch of stuff. And, I talked to a healthcare expert, and the details get really complicated. But the upshot was, yep, you're liable for it, and that's just the end of it. You could hire a lawyer and try to fight with the hospitals and the insurance company, and you might get it down by 10 or 20,000 and still end up in a place where you can't pay it. Right. And so he just decided to declare bankruptcy. But that's where it gets tricky because he can't, he dropped out of grad school. He can't work. He can't study because he's too sick. But in Texas, you can't, because Texas refused the Medicaid expansion, you can't get on Medicaid unless you're disabled. And he should be able to get disability, but his wife makes too much money over the Medicaid cutoff. So various options like maybe we could get divorced,
right,
just
sure. Yeah.
or that's a tricky thing too, because it might be fraudulent, or you could end up when he could be incapacitated, nobody could make decisions for him. But what they ended up deciding to do was hopefully they'll go through bankruptcy, sell their house, and then either try to raise money online through friends, a bunch of people have approached me after this story saying like, oh, what can we do? This is a pretty grim procedure. You see it all the time now. Oh, go fund me for
Right.
my brother's, broken hip or something. Or they could try to move to New York State where his mother lives, and they have more lax Medicaid eligibility rules, and so they could get there. And, it's just...
So there, if I can jump in for a second, Ryan
Yeah.
Cooper, to me, it's an important story, not because it's unusual, A, but because it's so common.
Yes.
And B, because when we get to the more global political stuff that both you and I cover, I take no pleasure in saying I told you so, but I worked in the private health insurance field for a while. And I was saying in 2007, when John Edwards was first bringing this up, this is not going to work out well. People are going to suffer under this system. Everybody seems to have a story. My wife had to have surgery. We have a quote unquote good employer plan. We walk into the hospital that morning, oh, by the way, we need a check for $3,600. That's not something most people can step up and do. So, and this guy's story it's illustrative of the kind of crazy quilt of the different state
Yes.
rules, as well as the fact that you think you have coverage. So when Democrats just made the tactical decision to run on the policy triumph, that was the Affordable Care Act in their eyes, I think they remain shocked, even though some of us could see it coming 10 years ago, that people didn't think of it as necessarily as such a triumph. But the statistics are, even with employer-sponsored health insurance, Milliman, the actuarial firm, its latest report shows that the average family, and of course that includes catastrophic situations, but the average family of four with good PPO health insurance that pays $10,000 out of pocket from their own pocket every year for health care. So, and obviously that includes all the catastrophes.
Yeah.
But we don't really we have something like broader health insurance, but we don't have universal health care, do we?
No, not even close. Yeah, and they didn't even snap everyone up into formal insurance coverage with the Affordable Care Act. They got like a third of the uninsured population, or maybe 40%. But even, those people who have, coverage, so something Matthew was telling me was, he thought he was paying a lot of money in premiums for this coverage, but when he really needed it, it didn't exist. He wasn't insured, in a meaningful sense when he, just by virtue of his situation. And I think, the mistake that Democrats made was they really underestimated in practically every decision they made in 2009, 2010, the level of aggressiveness that they needed to deal with their deep-rooted problems. It's like the Affordable Care Act was like sort of trying to tidy up this pile that was way bigger than they thought it was going to be. And so now, all these problems are cropping up. The exchanges aren't working as well as they thought. They're not collapsing, but it's like, people don't like this insurance. The deductibles are too high. The networks are narrow, and it's really expensive, and they can't get enough young people in. Like, boy, it seems like it would have been a lot better decision to, for example, federalize Medicaid
Right.
and just take the whole thing in and make it like Medicare. Just say this is just another part of Medicare, and you wouldn't have this ridiculous Supreme Court decision that could have cored out like half of the benefit that theoretically you could have had. But the wonks, they thought that the policy logic makes sense. Like, well, it makes sense, but you don't realize how rotten the system is.
Well, yeah, I worked in healthcare economics for years, so it was particularly annoying to me personally when people say, no, but you don't understand the actuarial, the three-legged, that the young people have to come in and you got to do this and you got to do that. The word kludge was invented for a reason, that, it's not that I don't understand, it's that it ain't going to work because it's just too clumsy, it's too complicated. So why did they do it this way, in your opinion? I have my own, but what's yours?
I think that, they were, a lot of people thought that Obama was this kind of, second coming of like LBJ or something, like a really like committed liberal who was gonna, do a big old expansion of social insurance. But, neither he nor the party as it was constituted in 2009 were really dedicated to the idea of, like Medicare and Medicaid being the best parts about the American healthcare system. And I think that they just, the thing about the exchanges is that you could have done a reform without trying to set up this jerry-rigged market simulation. James Quack wrote a great piece that was like, what the Obamacare markets are is a simulation of to provide something through markets that we don't want allocated by markets. All the natural market outcomes that you get are what you don't want to have when you have health insurance, rationing, care by price, for example. So you have all these complicated mechanisms when you could have just said like, well, everybody who's uninsured will get a chance to buy into Medicare or something like that, Right. When it was, again, back to the aggressiveness thing. Like I remember in 2010, Joe Lieberman personally killed the public option in the Senate bill because he was mad that liberals had primaried him in 2006.
Well, that's what they said, Ryan, and I guess it's true. But I remember saying at the time, if Joe Lieberman hadn't existed, they would have had to invent him.
Right. Yes. And the clear. So I guess the fundamental thing, if you really understood that if you want to get a big stimulus in and you want to get a really effective healthcare bill through, the thing to do would have been to abolish the filibuster on day one of the Obama administration. But they're just too genteel, moderate. Look at Dianne Feinstein voting for Mike Pompeo to be CIA director. It's like they're characterologically weak, timid compromisers who believe that the system as it exists is basically fine. It doesn't need like structural overhaul, and we can just have these little tinkery, neoliberal mechanisms, and that's what we need to do.
Well, I agree with that. I think that is a democratic mistake, and I think the other democratic mistake is they want to live in a different world than the one they live in. They want to live in a world where you box genteelly like Jersey Joe Walcott in the 1920s when they're in the WWE right now. People are banging them over the head with chairs, and you either fight the way they're fighting or you get out of the ring. That's my feeling about the Democrats now. But I also think, getting back to the Affordable Care Act, and this is kind of the theme of this week's show, I think there's a big ideological split that we should be open about on the left or Democratic side of the spectrum, which is I think that a lot of Democrats in office are really kind of privatizers at heart, and that ideologically they liked the design of the Affordable Care Act. I don't know. Do you think I'm off base with that, or?
Oh no. Well, certainly the balance of power in this Senate, at least, was they had taken huge contributions from the pharmaceutical industry and from the medical device industry, and they the first principle of Obamacare was, well, we're going to buy off all the stakeholders first, and then see what we can get through, because you had all these Democrats who were, like Lieberman, and also Max Baucus, who was deeply in bed with the medical industry writ large. And so when those guys are the ones that you have the votes you have to have, your system is going to be compromised. Chris Hayes had an interesting analogy for this, is like saying that it's sort of like the difference between when you're building a road, and you have a mountain to go around. You can either blast a hole straight through the mountain, like that's kind of the New Deal approach, or you can just go around it at 5 times the distance but less effort. And that was sort of the Obamacare approach, I think.
Right, but every time people have to go all the way around the mountain, they're ticked off.
Right.
And they're ticked off at you. They're not, thank you for building a road around the mountain. Why do I have to go all the way around the mountain?
Right, and it turns out the road only goes like halfway.
Right,
We didn't bring enough gas.
Right, yeah. And I think that's where, so where does that leave us going forward? Because now we've got Trump, he's to me, the Affordable Care Act didn't have a natural constituency for it.
Yes.
Because of the way it's designed. And you have stories like this, and people are, blaming the Democrats. Now Trump's vowing to, whatever Trump does is going to be ridiculous, absurd, ineffective. People are going to be even worse off than they were before. So do you see any road forward in any of this to reshape? I mean, I got my opinion, but what's your opinion?
I think that there's a lot of, well, first of all, it will depend on what the Republicans do, because there's all the heritage blueprint, and they're going to.
And Obamacare, by the way, was largely created with a heritage blueprint.
Right. Yes, it was one of those. It was one of those Republican things where they have a counter offer that they would never actually do. Like, oh, what's your health care plan? Well, here's something conservative that if we were in a position to pass, we would never pass. But so. They want the heritage plan is not just to get rid of Obamacare. It's also to block grant, basically destroy Medicaid, cut Medicare spending by 41% over 10 years, and the S-chip, cut that by a whole bunch.
Deregulate health insurance by allowing products to be sold over borders.
Yeah,
so the
right,
state with
right.
no regulations is just going to get all the insurance companies.
So that would be chaos, unimaginable horror, and just thousands and thousands of people dying. I don't know that they'll be able to bite that bullet, but I wouldn't be surprised if it just goes through. I feel like at this point Trump is just signing whatever they put in front of him, while he's watching Fox News in the evening. So if that's the case, and I think that there would be a chance for the kind of look at how many people are out there marching against Trump, and if they tear up the system bad enough, the underlying justification of Obamacare, we can't disrupt things too much, will just be thrown out the window. No, it's broken. We got to fix it right.
In which case we can say, or somebody can say, now it's time to get health care for everybody that really works.
Yeah.
So unfortunately, we're going to have to keep it there. But Ryan Cooper, national correspondent for The Week, thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks for having me.